The Salma Montes case. Why did a young student pay with her life? Our today's story, widely publicized as the Salma Montes case, took place in Mexico just a few years ago. The victim was a young law school student who was guilty of breaking off her engagement to her fiancé, who abused her. For this, the 22-year-old girl paid for her life in the most brutal way, and her executioner, with the support of loved ones, was confident that he would escape punishment. In a wicked irony of fate, Salma studied at the faculty, specializing in crimes against women. Who is Salma Montes? Our current heroine was born in 1996, November 18th, in a small Mexican town, Delicias, located in the state of Chihuahua, in the northern part of the country. The full name given to her at birth is Salma Yajaira Montes Soto. She was the youngest of 2 children in the family and was raised with her older sister Karen. The girl's birth father, whose name was Gabriel, passed away from a heart attack when Salma was barely 4 years old, and her sister was 8 years old. Since then, their mother Soledad raised the children on her own. The woman never married again and devoted herself to her daughters, doing everything to ensure that they did not need anything. Salma grew up a kind, sociable, and responsive girl. She had many friends from an early age. She adored animals and always came to the aid of others at the first call. Those around her characterized her as a petite, smiling brunette with incredibly beautiful eyes and a kind soul. As a child, Salma, playing with her sister, fell off the swing and split her eyebrow, which left her a small scar in the form of a crescent moon, but it did not spoil her attractive appearance, and rather even became a kind of highlight. In adolescence, the girl, like many of her peers, decided to make a few small tattoos, which, as it seemed, reflected her inner world and state of mind. Her mother, although she was a person of conservative views, did not object and prevent her younger daughter's self-expression. She did well in school, although she was not an excellent student. She dreamed of getting a higher education, but knew that her family has no money to pay for expensive university tuition, and therefore made every effort to get a scholarship and study for free. Although not without difficulty, but Salma succeeded, and she became a student at the prestigious National Autonomous University of Mexico. The girl entered the Faculty of Law, choosing a specialization, crimes against women. Roman with a butcher. In 2006, the 20-year-old student met a young man whose name was Kevin Gualberto Pilcaster. The guy was 5 years older than her. He worked as a cook in one of the local catering establishments and dreamed of a career as a restaurateur. It is noteworthy that the young man began his professional career as a butcher, cutting up cattle carcasses in a butcher's shop owned by his family. Kevin was quite nice, good-looking, and courteous. He knew how to make a good impression, and he seemed to Salma to be a good guy. Between them began a friendly communication, which very quickly turned into a romantic relationship. 5-year age difference was not a serious obstacle, and about a year later the couple officially engaged. Members of the Pilcaster family gladly accepted Salma, despite the fact that her family was much more modest in terms of material wealth. They believed that the young beauty has a positive effect on Kevin, who next to her literally glowed with happiness. But there was another reason, which they preferred not to talk about. As it turned out, the guy had attacks of aggression, from which suffered all those who were unlucky to be at that moment near. However, after the engagement, as it seemed to everyone, he became a little more restrained and calm. But Soledad and Karen did not want to be related to the rich chosen Salma. They noticed a change in Salma's behavior, which caused them genuine concern. Since the beginning of their relationship with Kevin, she became withdrawn, often crying, closed in his room, and from the smiling and cheerful leader has not left a trace. At the same time, Salma desperately tried to convince her mother and sister that she was fine. In addition, her face and body were periodically bruised, which she carefully tried to hide, and their origin was not explained in any way, avoiding an answer. When Salma accepted a marriage proposal from her boyfriend, her loved ones were shocked and desperately tried to dissuade her from marrying a guy who abuses her. But the young student, despite everything, was in love with her chosen one and naively believed that everything would change for the better. A scandalous breakup. Time passed, and Kevin became more and more irascible, aggressive, and intemperate. He was jealous of his passport literally to every pillar, forbade her to communicate with fellow students, and in general with any guys, and also demanded that Salma daily reported to him about where she was and with whom she saw. On this ground, the couple constantly quarreled, and the young man often put his fists into action. At the end of March 2019, after another major quarrel, which ended in manhandling, Salma broke off the engagement just a couple of months before the planned wedding. For her fiancé, it turned out to be a terrible blow, but not because he loved the girl, was very worried about it and wanted to fix everything, but because he took the deed of the chosen one as a personal insult. First time, Kevin tried to return the bride, but he did it in an ultimatum and orderly form. When he realized that she did not want to see him anymore, he suddenly changed tactics. He again became courteous and polite, as at the beginning of their relationship, offered the former lover to remain friends and continued to communicate. A couple of weeks after the breakup, the young people finally calmly talked and seemed to have figured everything out. Salma at the time was actively preparing for the defense of the diploma, had an internship, and was too busy studying, and therefore about the conflict with her former fiancé and broken engagement almost did not think. When on May 31st, Salma unexpectedly called Kevin and proposed to meet, she did not think it strange or suspicious, and she agreed. They agreed to see each other that evening in the parking lot outside the local Natural History Museum on the northeast side of town. The guy worked near the place and often left his car there. After school, Salma was given a ride to the building by a close friend of hers named Violet. Since it was Friday night, they said goodbye until Monday, agreeing to go to the library together that day to study. There was a Ford Transit van in the parking lot, which belonged to Kevin's parents and which he himself used as his work vehicle. The young man was supposed to show up any minute, so Salma headed for the car while her friend went home. Salma has not been seen alive since. Disappearance of a student. When Salma did not return home in the evening, her mother and sister sounded the alarm. She always warned her loved ones if she was going to stay out late or spend the night at a friend's house. About the planned meeting with Kevin, Soledad and Karen did not even guess, because Salma, not wanting to upset them, hid it from them. The student's cell phone was turned off, and after several hours of unsuccessful attempts to reach her, her mother and sister began to call her friends, but they could not help. When the relatives contacted Violet, she said that Salma was going to meet her ex-fiancé, and she drove her to the meeting. At this point, the women realized that something terrible had happened, and it was time to sound the alarm. They immediately, right in the middle of the night, went to the police station, where they reported the disappearance of Salma, as well as their terrible guesses about what might have happened. Law enforcers took the statement of the concerned women seriously and quickly began searching for the missing student. The first thing was questioned Violet, who last saw Salma. She confirmed that she took her friend to meet her ex-fiancé, and they said goodbye in the parking lot. And a couple of hours later, Salma Montez's phone was turned off and unavailable. Kevin, who was visited by the police in the morning, said he saw his ex-fiancée in the parking lot. They talked for a while and went their separate ways. It was obvious that the guy was not telling us something, but he had nothing to show for it. Less than 24 hours had passed since Salma's disappearance, and there was still hope that she would soon turn up alive and unharmed. And there were no good reasons for detention, searches, and interrogations, so the investigators limited themselves to talking outside the station and collecting testimony. Salma's friends, fellow students, and relatives took an active part in the search for her. They pasted flyers with her photos around the city, created posts on social networks, through which they asked to share any relevant information about Salma's whereabouts. The missing person was described as a petite, skinny brunette with light skin and brown eyes. Among the special features mentioned were her tattoos, 3 hearts on her stomach and musical notes on her right arm, as well as a small scar above her eyebrow. She was carrying a cloth backpack with textbooks, notes, and a student ID card, which she always carried with her. A grisly find on the banks of the canal. On June 7, 2019, a badly disfigured and decomposed human body was found on the bank of a canal miles away from the interstate highway. the appearance of which was literally shocking. The hands were missing, the skin had been stripped off in places, the hair had been burned off, and the face had been mutilated beyond recognition. In addition, all teeth had been removed, and no personal belongings or clothing could be found. According to preliminary reports, the cause of death was a deep wound in the neck inflicted by the precise blow of a sharp knife. As a result of this action, the carotid artery was damaged, and the girl literally bled to death in a couple of minutes, and all other injuries were inflicted posthumously. Obviously, the perpetrator did everything possible to make the body unrecognizable, either by fingerprints, dental records, or any special features or external data. Experts only agreed that it was a young girl aged 25 years old, and it was immediately suggested that the body belongs to Salma Montes, who disappeared a week ago and whose story was actively replicated in the press. The mother and sister of the girl were invited to the identification, but they could not recognize their relative in the disfigured corpse. The women simply refused to believe that someone could have treated the kind-hearted and sympathetic Salma so cruelly. In order to unambiguously identify the identity of the victim, required an expensive DNA examination. However, the Montes family had no money for such research, so the test was conducted by a state laboratory, whose equipment left much to be desired, and the probability of error or inaccuracy was quite high. Unfortunately, the results of the examination confirmed that the mutilated body found did indeed belong to the missing student. However, the grief-stricken relatives of the girl still refused to believe it, and announced on social networks to raise funds for a second examination in a private laboratory with more accurate and modern equipment. Hundreds of concerned people responded to their request, and the necessary amount of money was collected quickly enough, but, alas, the retest only confirmed the results of the previous one. It was Salma, the only suspect. Relatives and close friends of the deceased in one voice claimed that she had no enemies or ill-wishers, but at the same time, almost all mentioned her troubled relationship with Kevin Pilcaster, with whom she broke off her engagement about a month before her disappearance. Salma's mother and sister claimed that her ex-fiancé abused and beat her, which is why she decided to break up with him. It would seem that this guy should have been the main, if not the only, suspect from the beginning. But until the body was identified, he remained at large and his house, car, and personal belongings were not searched, which gave him a great opportunity to get rid of the evidence. Only 2 weeks after Salma's disappearance, and a week after the discovery of her body, Kevin was taken into custody on charges of kidnapping and brutalizing his former fiancée. The young man himself categorically denied his guilt, although he agreed to cooperate with the investigation. However, his testimony has largely changed. The new version and found evidence. In the opinion of forensic experts, an experienced butcher or surgeon worked on the body of the girl. The hands were separated from the body with precise cuts on the joints, which spoke of a good knowledge of anatomy. The skin was also expertly and skillfully removed. As it turned out, the perpetrator removed it in places where there were tattoos, as well as noticeable birthmarks in order to eliminate the possibility of identifying the body by them. Since Kevin had worked as a butcher in the past and had extensive experience in cutting carcasses, the prosecution tried to cling to this thread. But the defendant's lawyers insisted that it was a mere coincidence, and this circumstance could not be used in court as evidence of their client's involvement in the case. According to the new version told by Pilcaster after his arrest, that evening they actually met with his ex-fiancée in a parking lot near his work. They were just talking when suddenly another guy approached them, who, according to Kevin, was Salma's new boyfriend. Allegedly, this guy was jealous of the girl's former fiancé and punched her in the face with a swing, but the defendant stood up for Salma. He told her to take shelter in his van, and he himself decided to deal with the offender in a manly manner. However, the fight had barely started when Salma jumped out of the van and begged Kevin not to hurt her boyfriend. After that, Salma and the stranger left, and Pilcaster went home. The defendant's parents and grandmother, who were called as witnesses, claimed that he returned home at midnight, changed his clothes, and went out with his new girlfriend named Consuela. Soon, the girl herself showed up at the station to confirm Kevin's alibi, saying that on that fateful night he was with her, and could not have committed the crime and then cover his tracks. The van in which the suspect was traveling was seized, and inside the vehicle was found washed-up traces of blood belonging to the deceased. In response, the young man claimed that Salma had gotten the nosebleed after a jealous boyfriend punched her, and she probably left a trail when she hid in the van while the men worked things out. However, according to Salma's family and friends, no new boyfriend has appeared for her since her breakup with her fiancé. She was completely absorbed in her studies, wrote a diploma, and preparing for his defense. By the way, to find this mysterious boyfriend, which Kevin could not even thickly describe, and failed, most likely because he made him up. Despite the new details and Consuela, who came out of nowhere to confirm the alibi of the accused, the whole story looked very strange and unreliable. Nevertheless, the court found that the evidence presented by the prosecution was insufficient to convict. Pilcaster was acquitted and released from the courtroom in August 2019. Escape from the city. Almost immediately after his release, the young man hurriedly left his hometown, and for about 6 months did not give any news of himself at all. This caused a storm of indignation among the relatives of the murdered girl because the case was not closed. The investigation continued, and the only suspect was simply released like this. In fact, letting him escape. As this unprecedentedly brutal case became publicized, and its details were covered in the press for about 2 months, many residents of the city decided to express their support for the Montes family. People gathered at spontaneous rallies, demanding to find Kevin and to reopen the case against him because he was clearly not telling something, and the story he told was not believable. Salma's family and the activists who helped them succeeded in getting the investigation reopened, and a second search of the suspect's home revealed a hidden cache in the wall containing Kevin's bloody clothes and a large kitchen knife, which he had probably used to kill and then partially cut up his victim. Most likely, he had not had time or was afraid to dispose of this evidence, believing that no one would find it in the stash. At almost the same time, Pilcaster, apparently following the advice of his lawyers, decided to make himself known and go on the attack. He didn't just make himself known, he filed a lawsuit against the Montes family, accusing them of slander, organizing his harassment, and tampering with evidence. The man said he was forced to leave town because he feared for his life because of the harassment organized by Soledad and Karen. In his opinion, the women had turned the entire town against him, and he was simply afraid of being lynched. As evidence, Kevin provided a mass of anonymous, threatening messages that he received on a daily basis, all because his personal information, including his phone number and email address, was published on the internet, as he assumed it was done by relatives of his ex-fiancée. He also claimed that he was being guarded under the house by unknown people who threatened to do away with him and his family. Following the gruesome discovery at the Pilcaster home, Kevin has once again become the prime suspect in the murder case and has once again been taken into custody. At the same time, the man and his lawyers insisted that the evidence was planted on him and also accused the Attorney General of collusion with the Montes family and the deliberate concealment of part of the CCTV footage, which allegedly could prove the innocence of the defendant and confirm his alibi. However, no such recordings were found because they simply did not exist. A new investigation and a protracted trial. Before Kevin could be taken back into custody, it was necessary to overturn his previous acquittal. This process was somewhat protracted because the judge did not want to admit his mistake and insisted that his decision was correct, and only right. However, after several sessions, the verdict was overturned, after which a new case was started, taking into account the discovered evidence. In this regard, Kevin's parents and grandmother decided to organize a real press conference, during which, answering questions from journalists, called their family members victims of the machinations of Soledad and Karen Montes. According to them, these women from the beginning were against the relationship between Kevin and Salma, while the Pilcasters loved Salma with all their hearts and already considered her a member of their family. They also claimed that they were literally crushed by the news of the death of the failed daughter-in-law, and soon they were in for another shock when their son was accused of Salma's murder. The suspect himself in the interrogation did not hide the fact that they had a difficult relationship with the former lover and even confirmed that, at times, raised his hand on her. He justified his actions by the fact that Salma, allegedly, he cheated and he had the right to punish her. He also did not hide that he was annoyed when Salma broke off the engagement, which she, in his opinion, had no right to do, because it offended him as a man. A new trial did not begin until June 2020. This time Kevin was charged with kidnapping and aggravated brutal murder, motivated by gender-based hate. In fact, he himself led the investigation to this conclusion, constantly repeating, "A woman had no right to act and speak like that." The collected evidence, including the bloody clothes and the knife, which was recognized as the murder weapon, as well as the testimony of witnesses, was enough to convict. And the story previously told by Kevin about Salma's new boyfriend, who, in his opinion, and was the real culprit, simply fell apart because there was no other guy in the parking lot or in the life of Salma. However, the prosecution requested time to complete the investigation, and the court agreed to grant the request. In this regard, it was decided to send the defendant for 6 months of pre-trial detention in a maximum security prison. But due to the coronavirus pandemic that swept the world, the investigation was delayed, and court hearings were repeatedly postponed. So Kevin's 6-month pre-trial detention dragged on for almost 2 years. A fair sentence. It wasn't until May 2023, on the eve of the 4th anniversary of the crime, that a new hearing was held, at which the prosecution presented all the evidence it had managed to uncover in the meantime. In court, several witnesses testified to the fact that Pillcaster abused his fiancée, beat her, and sought to control her every move, depriving her of any freedom. He treated her like a thing that belonged only to him and did not accept the fact that she chose to leave him. On August 16, 2023, Kevin was found guilty of aggravated murder as well as cruelty to the body. As for the kidnapping, this point of the charge, according to the judge, was not proven because Salma herself came to meet with her ex-fiancé and herself could get into his car. Nevertheless, the evidence presented in the courtroom was enough to send a young man to prison for life. More precisely, he was sentenced to 70 years in prison. But if we take into account that at that time the defendant was 32 years old, it is fair to say that such a sentence became for him a life sentence. In addition, Kevin was required to pay the Montes family about $45,000 as moral compensation. Salma's mother and sister later stated that they were quite satisfied with the verdict, although Pillcaster never admitted his guilt, did not repent, and did not explain the motives for his terrible and inhumane act. Jealousy is a terrible, often destructive force that can blind a person and push him to crime. It was jealousy that caused the tragedy that played out in Costa Rica a few years ago. This case went down in the history of forensics as the case of Gerardo Cruz. But let's talk about everything in order. Salma Fonseca was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. About her family and early years are known a little. The girl's childhood was in an area called Cuba, where she lived with her mother named Sonia Fonseca. Salma attended one of the local schools and even then demonstrated her difficult and conflicted character. She did not tolerate rejection, often achieved what she wanted by force or deception. According to the memories of local residents, Salma, thanks to her striking appearance and perfect figure, easily charmed men, but could not keep them. Salma was very beautiful and skillfully used her appearance, but because of greed and vanity, put material wealth and self-interest above all else, which simply discouraged cavaliers after a short relationship. In addition, she was incredibly jealous and aggressive. In her youth, Salma Fonseca, thanks to her doll-like appearance, worked for several years in the image of Barbie in one of the large bookstores of the company Universal. It was then that the girl received such a flattering nickname, firmly entrenched behind her for life. Soon after graduating from high school, Salma had an affair with a successful journalist who worked on local television. The man's name was Osvaldo Fernando Baleri, and he was 16 years older than her. It was the longest and most serious relationship Salma, but the chosen one never made her an offer. In 1996, the couple had a common son, Christopher, and a year later their daughter Christina was born. But because of constant scandals and attacks of jealousy, Salma, Valeri left the young woman. In 2012, 53-year-old Oswaldo died suddenly, and, as it soon turned out, he did not enter the former lover in his will. The young woman was not going to put up with it, and decided to take matters into her own hands. She went to the house of a former lover and actually seized it, changing the locks there so that relatives and heirs of the deceased could not get in. In addition, Samodi took some valuable items belonging to the deceased. The Valeri family members were quite outraged and immediately went to court to punish Samodi for the theft. The police forced the young woman to leave the house, but criminal proceedings against her were not initiated. Fonseca had many other romances, in particular with Juan Miguel Angel Perez, from whom the woman gave birth to her third child, a daughter named Maria. According to some reports, this relationship was officially registered but ended in divorce after a few years, although other sources claim that Samodi was not married. At the same time, she gave her youngest daughter her lover's surname without his knowledge or consent. It is a curious fact that some lovers of Barbie mysteriously disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances, but for a long time, for some reason, no one paid attention to it. So, for example, one of Samodi's lovers went missing, and according to relatives, it happened soon after he decided to break up with an irascible and aggressive lady. The man to this day has not been found, and many are sure that Fonseca is directly related to this case, but some irrefutable evidence of her guilt could not be found. Samodi's other former lover, whose name was Diaco, died tragically after breaking up with her. He was murdered, and everything looked like a failed robbery attempt, and the mysterious killers were never brought to justice. Again, everyone speculated about Samodi's involvement in the crime, but no hard evidence was found against her. However, her most famous victim was Gerardo Cruz. Cruz, a native of Costa Rica, he was born in December 1992 in the city of San Jose. His own father, the boy did not know, because he left the family before the birth of his son. His mother, Ana Patricia, soon married a man named Hermes Rodriguez, who adopted the baby and raised him as his own. And a few years later, Gerardo had a younger sister, Milena. Childhood and youth of the guy can be characterized as a calm and carefree period. He studied at an ordinary school, was fond of motorcycles, and early met his true love, a girl named Carol. At the age of 23 years, Gerardo, along with his chosen one and their common daughter, 4-year-old Genesis Cruz, settled in the house of his aunt and uncle in the metropolitan suburb of San Sebastian. The young father took a job at a local bakery to provide his family with everything they needed. The couple was quite happy, and soon they learned about the upcoming addition to their family for the second time. In the summer of 2015, Gerardo met Samodi, who periodically shopped at the bakery where he worked. At that time, the woman was already 40 years old, but she was still quite attractive, loved to wear frank outfits and flirt. It is worth noting that with age she began to have affairs with men who were much younger than herself, because the attention of young lovers probably flattered her. Despite the almost 20-year age difference in the presence of a family, Cruz quickly became infatuated with a beautiful woman and began to secretly meet with her. She herself began to visit the bakery almost every day to be able to see her young lover, which did not escape the attention of other employees. In addition, Samodi often appeared accompanied by her eldest daughter, Christina, who was 19 years old at the time. At first, Gerardo managed to masterfully combine family life and secret meetings with his mistress, and so that none of his women did not realize the existence of a rival. But soon Gerardo, as they call it, lost his guard. Obviously, he wanted to boast of his success with women, and he began to tell friends and colleagues about Samodi, about what she is a terrific mistress and spoils him with gifts. Rumors quickly reached his mother, who tried to reason with her son and convince him to leave his mistress. The affair lasted only a few months and broke off in October that same year, 2015, when Samodi found out that the lover had a pregnant wife and a young daughter. The woman was furious. She started calling and texting Carol, insulting her and threatening to kill Gerardo if he didn't belong to her alone. Gerardo managed to beg his wife's forgiveness and keep the family together. As for the former mistress, he did not take her threats seriously, believing that she would quickly cool down and find a new boyfriend. He did not even realize how insidious and vindictive Samodi would turn out to be. Just a few days after the breakup with Fonsek, Cruz became an accidental witness to a blatant scene. As the young man was walking down a downtown street, he saw a certain older man trailing behind a young girl, holding his phone in such a way that the camera was positioned under her miniskirt. The guy was outraged. He also took out his phone and started filming what was happening, then stopped the girl and told her about everything, advising her to go to the police. Cruz then chased after the man, trying to capture his face on camera. He chased him for about 2 minutes, wondering loudly if he was having a good time taking pictures of the girl's underwear without their knowledge, until the man jumped into a cab and drove away. That same night, Gerardo posted the video he had made on his internet page, and in just one night, the video went viral as users quickly identified the elderly man as a former official, an employee of the Ministry of Finance named Luis Sulmano Delgado. Soon, the video was picked up and circulated by the media, and Gerardo himself became a national celebrity. The young man was interviewed almost daily for print publications. He was invited to television and radio programs. He talked about the incident he had witnessed, condemned the actions of the former official, and said that he had no regrets about his action and would do it again. At the same time, experienced lawyers hired by Sulmano Delgado began working against Gerardo, accusing him of wrongdoing. They claimed that the distribution of the videotape made by the guy violated the law and were preparing a lawsuit against him in court. Cruz himself was quite surprised by this turn of events and did not understand why they can judge him, and not the man who committed such a disgusting act against an innocent girl. Gerardo gave his last interview on October 7th on the air of one of the local radio stations. He was sure that he was right and believed that he had nothing to fear. The next day, Gerardo had arranged to meet with his friend Oswald after work, but he abruptly canceled the meeting, citing a sudden emergency. As it later became known, that day, he received a message from Samodi, in which a young woman tricked him into coming to the park in the evening, where he was supposed to be interviewed again. Gerardo didn't even suspect anything wrong and simply believed his former lover. After the end of his shift, he went to the agreed place, but there were not journalists waiting for him, but 2 unknown men who took away his bag, beat him and stabbed him several times in the chest and stomach, and then fled. The injured man, before losing consciousness, managed to call his friend and report what had happened, and the latter immediately called the police and medics. Thanks to his prompt action, Gerardo was taken to hospital, where doctors fought for his life for 42 days. During this time, Gerardo underwent dozens of operations, but alas, to save him failed. On November 19th, Cruz died in the intensive care unit. Since shortly before the tragedy, he became a real celebrity. His condition, without exaggeration, followed the whole country. Gerardo's relatives periodically gave interviews in which they asked all concerned to pray for his recovery. They themselves did not understand who and why could do such a thing to Gerardo. At the funeral of the guy came a lot of people who wanted to express their condolences to his family. Also, everyone expressed hope that the police will quickly get on the trail of the killers and they will be fairly punished. Initially, there were several versions of the crime. The first was that it was a robbery murder. Indeed, Gerardo was attacked in the park in the evening. His bag was taken away and he was stabbed with a knife so that it looked like a common thief. However, just a few days before, Cruz had released a sensational video compromising a nationally known former official. Hence the second theory, a revenge killing. The media openly said and wrote that Sulmano Delgado could well have hired hitmen to remove the young man who had spoiled his reputation. The murder was hotly debated in the press, and people picketed the streets demanding that the killers be found and jailed. The police began to put forward and consider different versions, as well as to look for other possible enemies and ill-wishers of Gerardo. For several months, the investigation stood still, until in May 2016, a video from a street surveillance camera was discovered. The footage shows 2 men running away from the scene where Cruz was fatally shot. These men immediately became prime suspects, but it was up to the police to identify and track them down. The tape turned out to be a key piece of evidence, and once it was made public, the case moved forward. It was repeatedly played on news programs, asking viewers to look closely because these could be dangerous criminals. In addition, the police were able to draw up rough sketches of the wanted men and describe their anthropometric data. Soon the identity of one of the men was established because he himself decided to surrender to the police and cooperate with the investigation in the hope that it will help him to mitigate the sentence. Thanks to the information he provided, the investigation quickly came to several other accomplices, as well as the organizers of the crime, Somadi and her daughter Christina. Soon all participants in the crime were taken into custody. In addition to the mother and daughter, several other men were arrested. Cab driver Ronald Archie, who found the perpetrators of the murder, laborer Cesar Chavez, who acted as an intermediary, and a young minor who was directly involved in the attack. Omar Costa, who had been following the victim and reporting his whereabouts on the day of the attack, was also later arrested. The roles and connections of all the participants in the crime were established through phone calls and text messages. The murder was ordered by Somadi, who had planned the whole thing carefully, including her daughter Christina in the details of the plan. Together, they turned to their friends Ronald and Caesar to help them find a couple of hitmen to kill Gerardo and make it look like a robbery gone wrong in a night park. They were later joined by Omar, who had to make sure the victim went to the agreed-upon location. Somadi chose the date of the massacre herself, October 7th. On that day, she repeatedly contacted all the participants in the crime, assigned roles, and made sure that everyone followed the plan. In addition, the young woman demanded that after committing the crime to bring her something of the former lover's belongings as evidence. Cruz, after working his shift, headed straight for the park. He was sure that he was going for an interview, so he tried not to be late for the meeting. But at the agreed place, he was attacked, stabbed several times, and then took his bag and jacket, which were given to the customer as evidence. The main evidence of Somadi's guilt were the text messages in which the murder plan and the roles of each of the participants were described in detail. The woman was so confident in her impunity that she did not even bother to delete them. The motive for committing such a grave crime was banal jealousy. The woman did not want to share a lover with his wife, and decided that if he was not with her, then no one would get it. She thought everything through and involved in her criminal plan her own daughter, who helped her in everything. Mother and daughter were immediately taken into custody, and the fact that to release them on bail was out of the question, because the criminals would probably make an attempt to escape and leave the country. Their accomplices also ended up in pre-trial detention, except for Omar, who was in charge of surveillance, and the youngest participant in the crime was handed over to authorities specializing in juvenile delinquency. The investigation lasted about a year and a half, and only in December 2017, the trial of all participants in the criminal conspiracy began. In addition, it turned out that Somadi had previously been brought to criminal responsibility several times. In particular, she was arrested for forging documents to receive state payments, but then she got off with only a fine. In addition, the story of Miguel Angel Perez, the father of Somadi's youngest daughter, has surfaced. As it turned out, the young woman gave the child's surname of a former lover without his consent, and then through the court obtained from him the payment of alimony which she received more than 3 years. When it turned out that the whole procedure was falsified, the swindler was sentenced to 3 years in prison and a large fine. But the court took into account the fact that she had a small child and commuted the sentence to a suspended 5-year sentence. At the trial, the wife of the murdered Gerardo admitted that she knew about his affair with Somadi and that the former mistress had threatened him with death, but he did not pay much attention to the threats. The main motive of the crime, as already mentioned, was jealousy and wounded pride of the woman, who could not accept the fact that her young lover preferred to stay with his wife. Thanks to the records of phone calls, it was found out that the mother and daughter planned the crime together. It also became known that after the release of the very CCTV footage that captured the killers, Christine had a nervous breakdown. She called her mother, sobbing, and was on the verge of going to the police to confess, but she calmed her daughter, assuring that the investigation will never come out on them. The verdict was not announced until January 23, 2018. According to the court decision, Somadi was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Her daughter, as well as Ronald and Caesar, received 25 years in prison each. One of the killers went to a juvenile detention center. and the second was not found at that time. Omar, on the other hand, who had been following the victim, was acquitted. The family of the victim received $140,000 as moral compensation. After the announcement of the verdict, the relatives expressed gratitude to the court for the fair punishment for the killers of Gerardo. However, it soon became known that the lawyers of Samodi and Christina appealed to the appeals court to mitigate the sentences. The new trial took place in November 2019. At the same time, the identity of the second killer became known, who, according to Ronald, took part in the massacre but was not privy to the details of the plan. Ronald and Caesar also appealed to the appeals court, hoping to reduce the sentence. As a result, the sentence for each of the participants in the crime was reduced by 5 years. Now, Samodi is serving his 25-year sentence in one of the women's prisons in Costa Rica. As it became known in the summer of 2020, she registered a marriage with a woman with whom she met in prison. Her chosen name is Lindsay Diaz Lopez, and at the time of registration of the relationship, the one has already managed to leave the prison walls, released on parole, while Samodi will spend almost 2 decades behind bars. Today, we will visit Dallas, a modern city with a cosmopolitan spirit and southern charm. It is widely known for its skyscrapers, upscale shopping, restaurants, and rich cultural life. There are many historic districts, such as the West End with its late 19th century buildings and futuristic landmarks, shimmering glass towers and skyscraper spires that serve as the city's main landmarks. Dallas is a city where modern metropolitan life is infused with natural beauty. There are more than 30 parks in different parts of the city. The Gable Park residential complex is located at the epicenter of Dallas chic. Living here itself offers a vibrant, exclusive lifestyle and exquisite, unique experiences. The high-rise building is elegant in appearance, has a parking garage and concierge. It is a vibrant and luxurious apartment building with a landscaped saltwater pool, fitness studio, and gourmet coffee bar in uptown Dallas. It's a quiet and safe place with no crowds of tourists or neighborhood residents strolling by. On September 2nd, 2015, at 07:42 p.m., a car entered the Gable Park parking lot. The car parked, and a beautiful young woman got out. She had a shopping bag in her hands. She slammed the door shut, stepped away from the car, and a minute later, 2 gunshots rang out. With the business completed, the dark figure quickly jumped into a black Jeep Cherokee that pulled up and fled the apartment complex. Local resident Hashem Saad, who was walking to the parking lot to pick up his car, saw the injured woman and called the emergency services. Officers arrived at the scene of the tragedy and found the injured woman. Unfortunately, she was already dead. The victim turned out to be 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher. Kendra K. Hatcher was born February 3, 1980 to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois. Her parents divorced and her mother married Bruce Jamieson. She was not an only child. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Kaufman, Ashley Lipscomb, Melissa Jameson, and 1 brother, Neil Hatcher. She grew up in Pleasant Plains and studied dentistry there. After her divorce in 2010, she moved to Dallas, where she began working at Smile Zona Dental Studio. Kendra had a strong Christy and faith and wanted to use her dental skills to help others. For example, the clinic provided services to disadvantaged children completely free of charge. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible studies and participated in volunteer programs that included building churches overseas and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. Dallas was welcoming to the young professional. Kendra's professional life quickly gained momentum and her personal life flourished as well. On May 24, 2015, Kendra began dating Dr. Ricardo Paniagua. Kendra and Ricardo met through a dating app, and from their first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values, interests, and wanted the same things in life. Ricardo was finishing his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and even though they had only been in a relationship for a few months, the young men were already discussing their upcoming marriage. However, an incident in a parking lot took the life of his beloved woman and cut short all future plans. Investigators who arrived at the scene of the massacre examined the crime scene and put forward the version of robbery, as Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. Bullet fragments and a gun magazine were found on the ground next to her body. However, the manner of shooting and the traces of the gunshot pushed the robbery version to the background. One bullet struck the woman in the back and the other in the head. The entry wound from the bullet was at the top of the head and it exited through the chin, indicating that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was confirmed when it was possible to obtain CCTV footage and reconstruct a picture of what happened. The footage shows a black Jeep Grand Cherokee pulling into the parking lot at 07:15 p.m. Half an hour later, Kendra returns home and drives into the same garage. A few minutes later, a man approaches her, shoots her, and runs to the side, after which he jumps in and black Jeep on the move. The videos were of poor quality and the crime scene itself was not visible on them. It was impossible to identify the assailants, but the vehicle was put on a wanted list. It was decided to place the camera footage, images of the Jeep and the driver in the media. The authorities appealed to the public for help, and it helped. Police were contacted by a man named Jose Luis Ortiz. He reported that the car in the footage belonged to him. But Jose wasn't involved in the shooting and he wasn't driving it. When questioned, Jose explained that on the morning of September 2nd, he was approached by two of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez. They asked Jose to repair their car and, in return, to lend them his Jeep until the evening. The man agreed. He also said that later that evening, Brenda called Jose to a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Crystal Cortez later that evening drove the Jeep to Jose's house, so the man was quite surprised when his Jeep made the news. When Jose saw his Jeep on the TV program, he asked Brenda about it. She first said that it was a different Jeep on the screen. Then Brenda explained that Crystal had been traveling somewhere on her business and she didn't know about it. Brenda Delgado suggested that Jose not tell anyone anything and to simply repaint the Jeep. She was willing to pay to paint the Jeep. Jose was awaiting a decision on his U.S. citizenship and did not want any trouble with the police. He realized that Brenda had set him up. So Jose went to the police again and testified again. So the police tracked all the movements of the Jeep that day and found the two young women whose names Jose had given them. Brenda Delgado was the first person investigators called in for questioning. The woman told police that she never knew Kendra Hatcher and had never seen her before. When asked where she was on September 2nd at 07:42 p.m., Brenda stated her alibi because she was at Chili's restaurant with Jose. Brenda even provided receipts for the dinner. But how often, and more importantly, what do you keep dinner receipts for? So gradually, assembled in minute detail, the truth that the participants in the crime tried to hide was revealed. The central figure in the investigation was Brenda Delgado. She was born into a fairly simple family, Luis and Maria Delgado, who immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father was a factory worker. They found a home in a low-income neighborhood in southeast Dallas. It was then that Luis found a job in construction, and his wife worked at the U.S. Post Office cleaning houses. Brenda was their second child and their only girl. Not only was she an excellent student who was loved by her teachers, but she also worked part-time at a flower store and as a waitress. Brenda was very ambitious and dreamed of going to medical school someday. But the sad reality was that her parents couldn't afford the expensive tuition. So after graduating from Skyline High School in 2000, she continued to live with her parents, only dreaming of an affluent and beautiful life. On the way to her goal, Brenda worked hard. She was a dental assistant, and alongside that, she worked at a day spa in North Park Center where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, Brenda met Ricardo Paniagua and fell in love with him. Their first date was at a Jennifer Lopez concert and was like her dream date. In November 2012, 3 months after they met, Brenda moved in with Ricardo at his home in Fitzhugh Urban Flats. The man was also charmed by Brenda so much that he even met her parents. In 2013, she uploaded a post in honor of his birthday on Facebook where she wrote words of congratulations. "Happy birthday to the most amazing and smartest man I know. Ricky, together we have shared so much happiness. You are my best friend. I love you with all my heart and can't imagine life without you." Brenda then found out she was pregnant, but at Ricardo's insistence, she terminated the pregnancy, which left her heartbroken. A little recovered from the decision, Brenda decides to devote herself to her career and her beloved Ricky. In the fall of the same year, she enrolled in Sanford. At first glance, it seemed that Brenda had gotten over the emotional blow of the breakup. However, this was not the case. Brenda's painful dependence on Ricardo only gained momentum. And when Ricky posted a joint photo on social media with his new lover Kendra, who looked like a photo model, Brenda was up to something terrible. Many who knew her testified that Brenda dreamed of getting rid of Kendra. After obtaining information about Brenda and her personal life, investigators were able to surmise that the offended woman had a motive to get rid of her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend. They dated intermittently from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky and Kendra met. Ricardo was confident that he and Brenda remained friends and saw no problems between Brenda and Kendra. After all, he had been on dates with other women before meeting Kendra. And why would it be meeting Kendra that would turn Brenda's mind? However, the picture of the reconstructed events confirmed how insidious and cruel an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado thought she had devised the perfect plan to win back her former lover and rid him of the superfluous figure, Kendra Hatcher. At first, she established communication with Ricardo pretending to be his best friend, provided all kinds of support, was interested in how he and Kendra are progressing in their relationship. Secretly, she knew everything about their plans for the future, and Ricardo believed that this is a sincere interest. But it's a shame that men know women so poorly and sometimes blindly trust them. After Ricardo learned that Kendra had died, he shared his grief with Brenda via text message, and she supported her friend in every way possible and offered to do anything for him. Ricky had no way of guessing his ex's true motives. As it turned out, Brenda had been playing her own game for months. She had opened Ricardo's mail and knew about all his plans with Kendra, even where and when they had booked tickets. All of this was infuriating to Brenda. She longed to be rid of Kendra Hatcher, truly believing that she had taken her place. Brenda transferred Ricardo's account to her phone and kept tabs on him. Following Ricky and Kendra practically became her raison d'etre. Brenda became completely dependent on the stalking. She quit her job and devoted all her time to realizing her goals. Over time, a cruel and terrifying plan was born in Brenda's mind: to kill the hated Kendra and take her place beside her lover. For its realization, Brenda addressed to many of her acquaintances with an offer for money to harm Kendra Hatcher. Thus, Through mutual acquaintances, she found a single mother 21-year-old Crystal Cortez, who, because of the big financial problems, just for $500 was ready to help her. At Brenda's behest, Crystal found the perpetrator, a man named Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Crystal handed Christopher $500 from Brenda, as well as 2 types of illegal substances. Several 2 women followed Kendra to learn her habits and daily schedule, to further select the location and time of the crime. On September 2, 2015, they took Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher Love waited for Kendra in the parking lot. They did not pursue her on her way home from work because they were afraid of falling behind her in traffic. In the evening, the criminals completed their devious plan and were rewarded for a job well done. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were apprehended. The suspects denied their guilt and their presence at the scene of the crime. However, the situation changed when Love was found to have the gun that killed Kendra in the side compartment of the car. Crystal, on the other hand, was nervous and constantly confused in her testimony, telling different stories about the reasons for the appearance of the SUV in different parts of the city. So, at the first interrogation, Crystal admitted that she was the woman who was driving in the parking lot, but she arrived there at the will of an armed carjacker who got into the SUV and forced her into the parking lot that evening. She, wishing to remain innocent, gave false testimony, saying that her son was in the car with her. But this information was later not confirmed because no child was recorded on the cameras. As the interrogation continued and more evidence became available, Crystal changed her testimony and wanted to make a deal with the investigation. She agreed to testify and testify against Brenda in exchange for less time. She told police that Brenda wanted Kendra dead and the crime was her idea. According to Crystal, within 2 weeks of her meeting with Brenda, they began planning the crime. The police discovered that Brenda wasn't just unhappy that her relationship with Ricardo was over. She was obsessed and desperate to win him back. She pretended to Ricky that she was happy to be his loyal friend, but her life began to fall apart. She began to resent Kendra, believing that she had taken her place. According to Crystal, it was at this point that Brenda decided that she wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. The perfect crime plan emerged in Brenda Delgado's mind. In testimony, Crystal detailed how Brenda devised the perfect crime. Enlisting each other's support, Brenda and Crystal began to formulate a plan to kill Kendra. They met many times and developed many plans. The original plan was to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then get rid of her. But to avoid being under suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around the scraggliest neighborhoods and asked a few people if they could help. That's how they met Christopher Love. He agreed to help and took an active part in deciding the modus operandi of the crime. The trio unanimously decided that the best way to kill was to shoot him because it was quick. While cooperating, Crystal revealed that the date of September 2nd was not chosen at random. Brenda knew that Kendra and Ricardo were planning a trip to Mexico, so it was decided to get rid of the woman before the happy vacation. Brenda told Crystal that she wanted the crime to look like a botched robbery. Next, the criminals chose the location of the massacre. For days, they desperately tracked Kendra's movements and recorded her minute by minute to make sure nothing changed on the appointed day. After work, they traced her route home and figured out how to discreetly enter the apartment complex's secure parking garage. On September 1st, 2015, they made a final check. On the day of the crime, early in the morning, Brenda and Crystal picked up the Jeep from Jose, then picked up Christopher along the way. Brenda was dropped off at the library in Carrollton so she would have an alibi, and Crystal and Christopher went to Kendra's apartment complex. They waited across the street for about 30 minutes, then drove to Kendra's place of employment. After waiting for their victim, they followed her but lost her in traffic, however. They returned to the house first and waited there. As soon as Kendra drove in, Christopher got out of the car. He was wearing gloves, approached Kendra with a gun, and shot her when she got out of the car. According to Crystal, she did not actually see the shooting but heard it. Crystal then drove Christopher home, picked up her son from his grandmother on the way, and later met Brenda at Jose's house where she handed him the Jeep. Thus, Brenda's dream came true. She was rid of her hated rival, and all she had to do was wait for her beloved Ricardo's message. Brenda was happy that she had managed to pull off the perfect crime. Crystal's candid confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about Brenda Delgado's guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. But when police officers arrived with the warrant, she was no longer at home. Having dual citizenship, Brenda Delgado fled to Mexico. After fleeing, Brenda's involvement in a contract killing became apparent, and she was put on a wanted list. On April 6, 2016, the FBI placed her on the list of most wanted fugitives, assigning a reward of $100,000 for information about her. So Brenda Delgado became the only woman on the list at the time and the 9th woman on the list ever. But just 2 days later, in Torreon, Coahuila, she was apprehended by Mexican authorities and extradited to the United States on October 6th. Mexico agreed to extradite Brenda, but only on the grounds that she would not face the death penalty. When she was extradited back to the United States, she was formally charged with capital murder. Brenda was extradited to Texas, and she was brought to trial. Hearings in the case began in 2017. The grief-stricken relatives of Kendra and Ricardo did not hesitate to express themselves during the court appearance. The oil was added to the fire by witnesses who confirmed Brenda's intentions and her dangerous obsession with her former lover. Brenda's cousin, Moses Martinez, spoke in court about his sister's depression after the end of her and Ricky's relationship. He also revealed that Brenda offered to pay him if he hit Kendra with a baseball bat. He refused to do so. Brenda's friend, Jennifer Escobar, testified at trial that Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo and read all of his emails and tracked his movements on her phone. She told the jury that Brenda even kept a copy of his house key and had access to his bank accounts. Jennifer revealed that Brenda had asked her to help eliminate the hated Kendra Hatcher too. She also told the court that Brenda wanted her to either inject her with something lethal or use a bat and leave her in a coma. For her help, Brenda offered to give her $2,000, a car, and illegal drugs if she would do it. Jennifer discussed the offer with her parents and then refused. It is quite strange that adults, having been offered the suggestion to harm or kill someone, contemplated doing so, and none of them went to the police to report a threat to a person's life or health. The court heard evidence about obsession from a number of people who knew Brenda. So the court found that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She saw her as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, and she wanted only one thing: to get back to Ricky. The court received corroboration that in the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda became increasingly obsessed. As evidence of Brenda's involvement, an ATM withdrawal receipt in the amount of $500, which she subsequently gave to Crystal for doing the work, was presented at the hearing. Christopher Love received a cash payment in the amount of $600. The cell phone data provided also indicated that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together prior to the crime. More than 99 calls were recorded between Brenda and Crystal between August 22 and September 4th. proving their constant communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. The defendant's attorney tried to shift much of the blame to the perpetrators, but it didn't work. The defense argued that Brenda was not at the scene of the crime. She had an alibi and receipts confirming her presence at the restaurant at the time of the crime. Brenda herself did not plead guilty, but the jury thought otherwise. It took them only 30 minutes to find Brenda Delgado guilty of the murder of Kendra Hatcher. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Christopher Love, the direct perpetrator of the crime, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death via injection. Crystal Cortez, in exchange for cooperating with the investigation and pleading guilty, received a sentence of 35 years in prison with parole eligibility. The family of Kendra Hatcher was satisfied with the court's decision and silently withdrew from the courtroom after the verdict. The Delgado family did not believe to the last that their Brenda could be involved. They knew her as a loving daughter and woman, healthy and with good family and Christian values. I hope this cautionary tale of female perfidy and mentally unhealthy obsessive love will leave a mark on every woman's soul and serve as a cautionary tale in new love relationships, for no man is worth a human life. Take care of yourself and be careful.